Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast today. I am super excited today because I've got my relatively new friend and brand strategist, Laura Meyer, here with me today. Hi, Laura.
Hi,
How
I'm
are
so glad to be
you?
here. I'm so excited to be
We had
here,
like a whole podcast recording already before we did the whole podcast recording.
which is kind of how we roll.
It is lots and lots of words for two introverts. Now, wait a second. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an off the charts extrovert.
Okay. Well, for an introvert, I sure talk to you a lot. I just want to say that. So I want to tell you guys just a little bit about Laura. So Laura is a serial entrepreneur. I love that. Who has scaled multiple 6 and 7 figure online and offline companies over the last 15 years. We're going to talk about that. Laura helps big national brands and high growth entrepreneurs with profit growth, effective marketing, and brand strategy. That is one impressive, like lots of impressive big words in there, girl.
There's lots of things that went well in there and lots of things that I learned from the hard way. So I'm
Yes.
really excited to share that with your
Yeah,
audience.
I'm super excited to have you here today. So tell people like about today, like where you're at today. Tell us just the tiniest bit about your family, what you do, and then we'll kind of back the bus up.
Yeah, so I help high growth entrepreneurs like yourself, people
Mhm.
who are influencers, online businesses, and then I also work with national brands, so traditional businesses that are looking to scale their growth based on their goals. And I'm a consultant, so I work from home. I just had our third baby, which
Like
was a
10 minutes
really
ago. You had her like 10 minutes ago.
She's 4 weeks today,
Oh my
and
gosh, is she really?
yes,
Like
yes.
if you had asked me, I would have said she's like 10 days old.
Yes, and it was so funny because when Jen and I met, we were out to dinner and,
Yes.
I'd order something without alcohol in it. And I remember her looking at me like, you're either really conservative or there's something
And,
up.
and yeah, and there was like no judgment, but I was like getting myself, my standard margarita with salt on the rocks, please. And everybody else at the table, ordered something, and then you didn't, I was like, that's fine. I have lots of friends that don't drink. That's fine. But then I was like, wait a minute. There was a glow.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And it was a really fun surprise baby in
Yes.
our 40s. So we weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
And she's awesome. Her name's Naomi. And she is here. And so I work very much part-time now, but there's definitely been seasons where I have been going full
Mhm.
force. We'll talk about that as well. And a lot of what I find so much joy in is helping other businesses grow from some of the things that I've learned the hard way, and
Yeah.
then some of the things that I did well over my 15 years of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your 15 years of being an entrepreneur, kind of how that got started, what you were doing, what that looked like.
Yeah. So like most entrepreneurs, I fell into it.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
at the
Accidental.
yeah, accidental at the
Yep.
young and naive age of 23, I started a wedding photography business. By
Mhm.
the time I was 30, I was photographing weddings across the country for celebrities. I was speaking and
I was going
teaching.
to say, you were like you weren't just like shooting, family photos in your backyard. Well,
No.
there's nothing wrong with that, but like your photography business was legit.
It was pretty legit. Yeah. People who are listening might even have watched me on stage at some of the conferences. My last name was Novak at the time. So
Yeah.
some people who are listening might be like, oh my gosh, that's Laura Novak.
Yeah. Very
And
cool.
I had developed some great relationships, and I loved that aspect of being a photographer is the connection piece.
Mhm.
And during that time, people would always say to me things like, Laura, you're so good at marketing. You have an amazing brand. And I'd be like, no, I'm a really good artist, right? Like sometimes we feel like that could even take away from the creativity we bring to the
Mhm.
table. And over the years, I learned to embrace it, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then, right at the time I was turning 30, I was thinking about having a family. I'd just gotten married, and I thought, you know what? I don't think there's that many places to go for great children's portraiture. So I
Mm.
opened up one location and then a second in the Philadelphia area,
Yeah.
both of which did about $500,000 in sales in their first year in
Which is
operation.
amazing. Yeah.
And it was an incredible ride.
Yeah.
Then I was approached to franchise. So I franchised my company and grew it to about 12 locations. And then about 2 years ago, I shut that whole business down.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I know we're going to talk a little bit about transitions and
Yeah.
pivots today.
Yeah.
And that was probably the toughest time for me as an entrepreneur. It's the first time I really experienced having to let go of something that I had worked so hard to create and
Yes.
walk into a new story that I didn't know what it was going to be yet.
Yeah.
And so today I've walked into being a consultant
Yeah.
to people like you, and it's so rewarding, and I just love it so
Yeah.
much.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview you. Aside from the fact that I love working with you, aside from the fact that I just love you as a human being,
Mhm.
I also know that a lot of the women who are listening right now, and men, we've got like 2 men listeners. So I always want shout out to the 2 guys. Um,
Both of our husbands.
yeah, exactly. Hey, actually, my husband does listen to my podcast. Thank you, Jesus. And one of my son, my friend my son Easton, his friend Alex, 16 years old, listens to my podcast. So hey, Alex, I'm like,
Hey,
that's
shout out to Alex.
right. Alex is going to be one smart cookie one day. But the reason I wanted to really chat with you is because I know there's a lot of people who are in transition mode right now. And
Yes.
sometimes transition has a lot of loss attached to it. Sometimes
Yes.
pivoting has loss attached to it. And there's people that they're losing things right now. They're losing brick and mortars. They're losing husband perhaps lost his day job. There's a lot of people who are in a transition period, and it doesn't always feel good. In fact, I would be willing to say that a lot of times the transitioning and the pivoting, it's painful. And so I'd love
Yes.
to know your experience with that.
Yeah. So I had gotten to this place where I had grown this business to 12 locations across the country. In our brand, there was about 75 employees. And every day, I just felt like I was not in my gifts. That's the best way I can describe it.
Mm,
I wasn't working in my strengths. I was just
yeah.
putting out fires all the time. And
Mm,
I knew that it was going to be a really long path to consistent profitability because with franchising, you make a very small percentage of the revenue for a long time. And you might not be profitable as a franchisor for 5, 6, 7, 10
oh yeah.
years.
And that's got to be hard
It's
because
very
you're
hard.
probably also working a lot.
A lot, a lot,
Mhm.
a lot of emergency calls at nights and
Yes.
weekends.
Yes.
And I realized how much freedom was important to me as an entrepreneur in that moment. And I also realized that I had started walking down this path that I no longer wanted to be on.
Mm,
And that's a really difficult
yes.
realization as an entrepreneur. Sometimes we become prisoners of our own dreams if we're
Yeah.
not careful. And that's why I'm always such an advocate of making sure that your goal is your goal, not someone else's goal, not what you saw someone else doing, but
Mhm.
is true to you. Because
Yeah.
if you let it be what you should do,
Mhm.
quote, should,
Yep.
then a lot of times you can end up, like I said, climbing the wrong mountain.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to
And then you're
me.
miserable.
Miserable. I was
Yeah.
miserable. I
Yes.
had friends just pulling me aside on preschool drop off saying, Laura, are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, are you really okay? And I wasn't.
Yeah.
And it was a really difficult time. And the photography industry was changing dramatically at that time.
Yes.
And I also knew that if I walked away, it would be really difficult. There was a lot that I was going to have to walk through.
Mhm.
And whenever I prayed about it, I just felt like the Lord was closing that door.
Yeah.
And I didn't see an opening.
And don't you
And
hate that though sometimes when you're like, you know it's for the best, but you're like, no, like in slow motion, you're like grabbing still for the door handle and you're like, let me hold on just a little bit longer. Yeah.
oh, I
Maybe
did that
that's
for
just
like a year.
maybe that's just my experience, but I know when the Lord was closing down my painting company, it took me also, Laura, a full year of
hmm
knowing in my knower I was supposed to close that thing and me being like, let me just hold on to it for a little bit longer because, at that point it was easy money. It was kind of a cash cow. I didn't have to do a lot. And I kept thinking,
Yes.
what could possibly be wrong with me just keeping it a little bit longer? And also I had a lot of my identity up
yes.
in that. Did you have, and by the way, mixed in with identity was probably some ego, like that's kind of what I was known for. Did you have that as well? I mean, you were very
Oh,
well known in your industry.
in my industry, in my community, it would be very rare that I would go out into a crowd and someone wouldn't come up to me and tell me how much they love my company and
Yeah.
who I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that was very common. And it was incredibly difficult for
Mm.
me to close down something that was named after me.
Yep.
I had given the franchisees permission free and clear to use the brand beyond me. So
Mhm.
they got to continue on with something that I had created without me. And
Mhm.
it was a
Mm.
difficult decision. There
Yeah.
was a lot of times where I had to take the higher road with some of the really challenging relationship things that came up.
Yes.
And you even watched me go through some of that. And
Yeah.
it was such a challenge. And I'll say that sometimes we don't let Jesus really take the wheel until we have nothing else to lose.
Yeah. Oh, that's
And that's what I really went through. I was still gripping on. I was still so attached to relationships that I thought were real, that were probably just connected to me because of the business. There
Yes.
were so many times where I I wanted my plan A to work so bad
Yeah.
until I realized that God was really preparing me for plan B, because that's what he wanted for me all along. And the letting go process is
Mm-hmm.
really, really challenging. And
Yeah.
for anyone who's listening and you're thinking, yeah, I want to let go, but I was wronged, or this
Yeah.
shouldn't have happened,
Yes.
or I feel like I still need to be right about this. I want to encourage you that transformation often takes place not when something new begins, but when something old falls apart. And
Mm.
it's really important to
That's
walk in.
tweetable, girl. That's tweetable.
It is.
For anybody that's still on Twitter.
And I have to credit Richard Rohr. He's the
Oh,
one who
good.
who
Okay.
started that quote. So we can tweet Richard Rohr,
Okay.
but I'm paraphrasing him.
Yes.
But it was such a difficult season for me.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it is the place where I experienced the biggest transformation, where I matured the most, and where so
Yeah.
much of the wisdom that I tap into today came from.
Yeah. Thank you for your vulnerability in that, because as I was telling you before we started recording here, uh, I've shared with you that 5 or 6 years ago, when I started making a pivot in my painting business from painting in people's homes locally here in Kansas City to being in the online space and teaching people how to paint their own home. Um, there was a lot of people in my industry not happy with that, Laura. And it was a
Yes.
very difficult time for me. There was so much slander. There was so much like heartache of watching of different people who I thought that I was in relationship with, who were also mad that I was doing things a different way that our industry had ever done. And it was a dark time in my business, where I knew in my knower that's what God was calling me to do, and of also feeling like I had to take the high road, and also just feeling like I was taking a beating at times and wanting to like defend myself and be like, that is not, the case. And I'm thinking, it's painting, people. How is there this much drama in the painting industry? But it landed my butt in therapy, because I was like, as a people pleaser, I had a really hard time with people being upset and with the drama of it all and all of the things. And now when I look back, I'm like, thank you, Lord, that
Yes.
I was never alone in that journey. It felt like it in my head. I thought I was by myself. I thought I was the black sheep of the industry. I thought everybody hated me. And now I look and I'm like, you know what? That just shifted an industry. That just opened a door for so many other people to shift to the online space. And now I'm so glad that I went through that. But in the thick of it, man, talk about some pain.
It is painful. And
Yes.
one of the things that I think is so cool about you is I watch you move forward, probably from that experience, fearless in a lot of ways. Like, you're not afraid of criticism. You're not afraid of putting yourself out there. And it's probably that it was preparing you for the work that you
Probably
needed to be
faking it really well then.
doing
Well,
today.
here's what I know to be true, and I know that you know to be true as well. When I look back on that situation, I could have let the opinion of man dictate what I
Yeah.
did, but I knew in my knower what God was asking me to do, and I'm so glad that the opinion of God, that I was able to be like, okay, that's the one that really matters, even though the opinion of man right now hurts.
Yes.
I had to go with the opinion of God, and so I just want to encourage any of you ladies who are listening, and I know Laura has the same heart. We share this, just if you feel like you're alone right now in a transition, in a pivot, in making changes, if you feel like somebody's wronged you in business, you've had to shift, you've had to, like Laura said, take the high road when they've taken the low road. If you feel like you've really been through the grinder, you're not the only one.
You're not. And the truth will come out.
It will.
It will. The Lord will always
Yes.
find a way to vindicate in his
Yeah.
timing.
Amen.
And you have to believe that, and you have to trust it, and you have to leave it in his jurisdiction.
Yeah.
It's not in your jurisdiction to make right on that.
100%. I'll tell you one of the ways that I can tell when a woman has healed. because some women are listening, probably Laura, who have been through the grinder and they're on the other side of it. And here's one of the ways that I think that you can tell when you've healed from a situation like that, whether it's personally or in business, is when you're on the other side of it and God vindicates you in some way and people come back around and are like, man, I'm so sorry that that went down like that, or I'm sorry I hurt you in that way. And instead of going, that's right, yes, I knew that they'd come back. Like, instead of that, you're like, hey, no, like, whenever that has happened to me, Laura, it's been like,
Yes.
it's no big deal. I'm like, well, thank you for that. But I haven't been holding on to anything for all these years. Has that been your experience as well?
Yes. I think that if that were to happen, my sense would be I've already forgiven you.
Yeah. Amen.
And if you've done the hard work, you've already let go of needing to be right about
Yeah.
anything, and you've really created space for forgiveness in your heart.
Yeah.
And so for anybody who's pivoting and maybe you're just mad at COVID, right? Like you're just
Right.
mad at
And you know
COVID.
what? That's a good thing to be mad at.
Yeah, right? And you're just angry. Like you might want to write COVID a forgiveness letter. I mean, there might be some work that just needs to be done.
Yeah.
But what I would recommend, and this is the thing that I did, that was the first time in my life. I mean, I'm a go-getter. I graduated top of my class from business school. I'm one of those people, right? I'm the A student, the gold star. And for the
Enneagram
first
3. Yes.
Enneagram 3. And for the first time in my life, I had no strategic plan. I had no plan to move forward. I had no agenda. I had no goals and goal charts and 90-day strategies and rocks. I didn't have any of that for the first time in my career. And sometimes God calls us into this season where we just need to leave room for him to show up.
Amen.
And I believe very strongly that if you are in a pivot right now and you're still hanging on to what used to be, what you wanted it to be,
Yes.
that it's very hard for him to speak to you. And when I created space in my life for him to show up, when I said, God, I don't know what's next, and I know it's not what I was doing before, and I'm just going to trust,
Yes.
that's when the miracles show up. I always say the miracles are in the margins. You have to leave margin for him
Yeah.
to show up.
I
And
love that.
I remember when I was transitioning out of my old company, which took a lot of time and lawyers and really challenging things that I went through, I texted a group of CEOs that I was friends with because I was part of different masterminds. And these are brands that you've probably been to that your listeners know and love. And I said, guys, I'm done. White flag.
Right.
I'm out, but it's great knowing you. And one by one, they all said, Laura, I'm so sorry. And I know how much you love this company, and I know how much you love working with moms and kids. And can you look at my funnel? Can you fix my marketing? I just hired a CEO, and he was the former CEO of Pure Barre, and he's asking about brand strategy. Can you talk to him? And that ended up being one of my greatest mentors as a consultant.
Yeah.
And he happened to be a believer, and it was just such an incredible experience to be around these high-level people who were reinforcing something that I didn't even know I was good at.
Yeah.
And as I started walking into that season, and they were saying, Laura, this is as good as what we would pay a really big agency to do. In fact, this is even better. I started to realize, wow, this is what I'm supposed to be doing next. And I would have never thought if you told me I was going to be a business consultant, I wouldn't have thought that at all. I'm a creative.
Right.
But what I found is the creative brain is really, really helpful when it comes to coming up with out-of-the-box business strategy.
Absolutely.
And we've worked on that with your brand as well.
100%. Yeah.
And it has been such a blessing in my life and in the life of my children to be around during this season. I firmly believe that I wouldn't have Naomi if I was still in that old path.
Yeah.
Naomi's our daughter.
Yes.
Because I was so stressed, and I wasn't creating space and time for things that I needed to do in order to heal. And when our bodies relax and our bodies create space, I mean, we struggled to have our first 2 children, and she came along unexpectedly at 41.
Isn't that amazing?
So it is amazing. It is amazing, which is why we named her Naomi.
Yeah.
Because Naomi in the story of Ruth is all about letting go of resentment and walking into a new life that paved the path for Jesus. through the lineage of David.
So,
And so I just would encourage you to take the walks, pull out your journal,
mhm.
let it all out and see what shows up. And also remember what it was that you were good at prior to all of
What
this
you built.
happening.
Yes.
What you built, your transition, your pivot. What are those little things that people would say to you? Oh, Jen, you're so good at
Mhm.
fill in the blank. And they always say that to you. Pay attention to
Yes.
that and think about not this being an ending, but a continuation of maybe something you were already good at, but just in a new way.
Yeah. I love
Eh,
that. I
Yeah.
love that. When you were talking earlier just about forgiveness and things, I wanted to mention that, in my inner circle where I get to meet so many amazing business owners, I have found, Laura, that sometimes, and I'm curious about your experience, but I have found sometimes women can be really good, perhaps at forgiving other people for things that have been wronged, in
Mm.
their business and the way other people treated them and, that sort of thing. But sometimes they have a hard time forgiving themselves for things that they said yes to that they shouldn't, a direction they took the company that in retrospect they shouldn't have, maybe the way they handled things when they didn't know any better. You know what I mean? And has that been your experience as well, that sometimes there needs to be like this, what, I forgive all of them because they, for what they did, but also this like, and I forgive myself too for that having been the first time I had to go through that and I didn't know totally how to handle things either, and or I made a bad decision. I've had women that have come in and they've taken their company in a wrong direction. And it's bankrupted their family, for instance, and the amount of guilt that they have around that. That it's like they can forgive other people, but they're having a hard time forgiving themselves and taking that into the next season. And so I'm curious if you have seen that also with all the entrepreneurs that you work with, just that needing to forgive themselves sometimes as well.
Well, you nailed it. That was the hardest thing for me to do, was to forgive myself for what I put my family through, for what I put my husband through, for him to have to watch me walk through this very difficult season and not really be able to do very much except for listen and support. And I think it was easier for me to forgive other people because I thought, well, they were new to entrepreneurship. They didn't necessarily know what was expected. This was maybe they didn't know any better. Maybe they don't know the Lord, lots of things, right?
Yes.
But for me, it was really difficult for me to forgive myself
Mhm.
because I brought a very successful company down a path that ended up not being we could say the right thing. That's the story, right?
Yeah.
But what we have to trust is that a lot of times we think about our career as this straight trajectory up and to the right, as the finance people like to say.
Exactly.
And it's rarely the case.
Right.
Our career trajectory is a zigzag. And sometimes we're going to zig in one direction and then we'll zag in another. And that is part of the journey of becoming better. And a lot of times when entrepreneurs come to me and they say, and I've even asked you this,
Mhm.
they'll say, well, I want to grow my company to this much money. And
Yeah.
I'll say, why?
Yeah.
And I want them to understand it's not better there than it is here.
Right. I
You
can
do
attest to that. Yeah.
It's not. It's not. You do it because of who you get to become on the journey. That's why you grow your company, because of the inner work that you get to do to
Mhm.
become a better person and that you can leave this bigger legacy. And if people say, well, I think it's just going to be better, or I think it's going to be easier when I get my business to 7 figures or 8 figures or 9 figures, I want them to know it's not. And I would be doing them a disservice by selling them a growth strategy
Right.
if they think that's the case. And so when we go through these bumps, when we go through these hurdles, we always want to look at it from this perspective of what can I take and move forward with?
Mhm.
And here's the thing I want to really encourage your listeners with. We always get to take who we are to the next iteration of our career. Nobody can take that away from you.
Amen. Yeah.
You always get to take your values and what you
Yes.
believe and your strengths and your talents and your God given gifts, and you can carry it to the next stage of growth. And it doesn't have to be exactly what you were doing before. And this is the core of branding, which I know we'll talk about as well. But that's part of why I love branding so much, because it is an outward reflection of that inner journey that all entrepreneurs go through.
Yeah. So there's lots of people right now, Laura, who are having to pivot. Lots of brick and mortar people who are
Yes.
shifting to online. Um, I think people have an easier time often selling in person sometimes at
Hmm.
brick and mortar, especially if they're people and they really love the idea of having their brick and mortar. But there's people who are really struggling to kind of pivot into the online space, and they're struggling with feeling like it's kind of like the wild west to them. They were really comfortable in their brick and mortar, and I know you were there as well. So
Yes.
any words of wisdom and advice to people who are now in the online space and they're struggling with like feeling like they're pushing, like it's different when you have a store and people like walk in, they're
Right.
there. They're like, but it's different when you're online and you're basically saying, my store is here in the online space. Like, come on in. Like, it's like you would be standing outside with with a megaphone going, come in, this is where I'm at. So how can we help some of the people who are pivoting from brick and mortars to online right now?
I think it's really a matter of being confident again in what you did so well as a brick and
That's
mortar,
good. Mhm.
and the relationships that you built, and being willing to bring those relationships online and those connections online. And a lot of times people get really weirded out by, well, I only have 80 Facebook followers. I only have 100 people in my group, or whatever it is that you're looking to build. But I would say, well, if there was 80 people in your store, you would be loving life. So
Yeah.
you really want to be thinking about it in that way. You don't want to think about each person as just a number. You want to think about them as a human that you get to connect with and have a relationship with. The challenge with online is that it's noisier, and you need to be clearer and more specific about who you help and how you help them.
Mhm.
And that's what I do find that most entrepreneurs who come from traditional business really struggle with. Because when they're in traditional business, like you said, it's you have this sphere of influence that maybe is like 5 mile radius around your store.
Yeah.
Whereas now you really need to be able to communicate it clearly and consistently online, and just be beyond clear on exactly what it is that you offer. So, for example, I'm working on a branding project right now for a company
Mhm.
that goes into your home, cooks dinner, and leaves it in your fridge. Super cool, right?
Yes.
And but the transformation they offer isn't I leave dinner in your fridge. The transformation they offer is the peace of mind, where how stressed you felt before about making meals, and how you feel after the dinner is left in your fridge that you know that your kids are going to love. That's what you're marketing. That's what you're selling. You're selling that transformation. You're not selling the actual stacked dinners in the fridge.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as you start realizing that and you can create connection around it, that's when marketing gets really fun and really easy. And you also attract the right people to your brand.
That's perfect. By the way, I would love that service. Just, and I actually would be excited about the meals just being in the fridge. But I love that. So,
It's on your Christmas list now.
yes, exactly. So, tell me about transitioning a brand because as a brand strategist, I'd love to know some tips that you have for shifting your brand and your message or scrapping it and starting something totally new when you're moving from that brick and mortar to the online space.
So, whenever you're moving from one stage to another, whether it's brick and mortar to online, or maybe you're moving from one business to the next,
Or an
the,
industry to another, is that possible as
right.
well? I mean, the weird not the weird thing, the cool thing is, and you've heard me say this before, that crisis always catapults people into calling. So there's a lot of people right
Yes.
now who are in the middle of crisis. Things are going sideways in their business. Things are being shut down. They're having to pivot. But a lot of times that's going to catapult you in a totally different direction. That's
Yes.
actually, what God's been wanting you to do all along anyway. And so,
Yeah.
but how do you do that as a brand sometimes when it's a hard right turn, maybe?
It's probably not as hard of a right turn as people are thinking it is in their mind,
That's good.
because you want to think about your business as two different components, your brand. There's the how and the why, right? And your why probably hasn't changed. What you stand for, your personal values, who you naturally connect with, what makes you who you are, your beliefs, your mission, your vision. As it says in Proverbs, without a vision, we perish. And
Amen.
so as we move from a vision manifesting in itself in one way, and I mean it in a worldly sense, like coming
Yes.
to life in one way, versus another way, is a little bit less relevant than who you are. And so, you, again, your mission, your vision, your values are probably very similar to what they were in your previous life or your previous business or career. And now the how of what you're selling and the offers you're making, that's just the outward reflection of the inward person that you are.
I love that.
And so that's what I love about branding. And that's what's really actually pretty unique about my approach to branding. Sometimes brand strategists will have you go through all these quizzes and these, what type of brand archetype are you? And I'm much more interested in who you are. What makes you tick? How did God create you in such a unique way so that when you figure out how to package it up and put it out in the world, you're attracting like-minded people who you have a natural connection with. And it makes it a much easier sell when it's actually time to make an offer.
I love
So
that.
going back to your why of why you started your first business. So for example, when I started franchising, I really wanted to empower other entrepreneurs to create businesses that they love in a way that honors them and also uses a lot of the lessons that I learned along the way. And now I do that just in a totally different way than I thought I was going to.
I
And
love
so that mission stayed the same. Again, it's just the offer is different and how it looks on the outside is different.
Now, I know we've already, you and I, done this work together, but I'm sitting here thinking about how when I used to own my painting company, I really just wanted to help women create an environment that they loved, that they felt
Hmm.
good in, that they felt like was theirs, that they were excited to come home to, that their family enjoyed. And now I just do the same thing, but with business owners. I help them create
Right.
a business that they love, something that feels good, something that their family gets to reap the rewards of. So it's like the same thing, but it's just in a different industry. I love that you've helped me make that connection. So
Yeah. And I think when we did your branding work too, a lot of times we forget that this lives in our hearts and our heads. And then when we figure out how to again communicate it in the words and how we message it,
mhm.
that ends up being the external reflection of this inner life that sometimes we accidentally under communicate.
Yes.
And so as we were doing your branding work, we really realized that there were so many through lines
Mhm.
from what your experience was prior to what it is today that you can use to serve other people and help them.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I, for one, am so glad that you shifted and pivoted, and because it's been such a blessing to me and to my business. And so, any final thoughts before I do a little rapid fire questioning of you? I don't
Yeah.
know if my team told you I'd be rapid firing you, but any other final thoughts that you would like to share with the women who are struggling right now, and maybe they know they need to shift and pivot, maybe they've been forced to shift and pivot. Either way, we both know how uncomfortable that can feel, and it feels like a tight spot. But any other lasting words of wisdom for them?
I would say just be open to what is God is calling you into next. Just be open to that possibility. And I know when we are going through struggle, it's so easy to get caught up in the what ifs and the whys and the why me and why didn't you move that mountain, God?
Yes.
And what I would encourage you to do is just those little moments where you think, I've heard that before. This is like the third time somebody's actually shown up and affirmed me in this.
Yeah. Mhm.
This is wow. Or if I really think about it, what would I do for free?
Yeah.
What would I do if nobody paid me and I just love
Mhm.
doing this? And paying attention to those little moments because that's God just shining light in your darkness.
I love it.
And as you continue to walk towards it, then it will create more and more light. And letting go of what is no longer working for you
Oh,
and walking into something new is the new story that you get to choose. And we get to choose the story we live in. We can live in the past story and the old story, or we can choose a new story. And that is God just inviting you into a new story.
I love that so much. So let me ask you some fun questions.
Yeah.
Tell me your favorite book.
You mean besides Fear is Not the Boss of You?
Besides Fear is Not the Boss of You. Absolutely.
Because that's obvious.
Tell us what you're reading
Um,
right now. Thank you.
I saw this question, and I'm such a bookworm. You know that. I always have like multiple books, and every time you interview somebody, I'm like, oh, I'm reading their book right now. It's so funny. But I would say for anybody who's going through transition, there's a beautiful book called Begin Again by a woman named Leanna, I hope I get her name right, Tankersley. And it's a faith-based book, and it's all about new beginnings and new transitions. And it was a book that I read 3 times in a row. It spoke to my heart so much when I was going through shifts.
And
So I
it's
think it would
called
be great.
Begin Again.
Begin Again.
I
Mm-hmm.
love it. Okay, perfect. Favorite room in your house?
It is the outdoor space in my home. It's my deck and the preservation land behind us,
Yeah, because you have like lots of wooded area and trees and things behind you,
and
right?
stream.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And it was so crazy because when I was going through all this transition, we were living in the city, and I had a dream that there was going to be a stream and there was going to be
Mm.
water in my yard. And I'm like looking at my concrete background, and I was like, a backyard, and I never imagined it. And then when we moved here, I realized there was a hidden stream in the backyard. So,
Did you know? I don't think we've ever talked about this. For 4 years before we moved into this house, God gave me dreams about us living by water.
oh my gosh.
Okay, so it got so like not creepy, but so crazy that I started saving the dreams and the notes on my phone. Sometimes it would be we lived by the ocean. Sometimes it would be that we just had a home with a pool. Other times it would be we were by a babbling brook. But it was always our house was by water. And I thought that was so strange. And then what was so cool, Laura, is the house that we live in has a pool. It has waterfalls in the pool. It has fountains in the pool. We have a stream behind our house then that feeds into the pond on the golf course. And I'm like, isn't that just like God? Like, because I just kept dreaming about us living by water. So I had no idea that you had the same dream. So
I
cool.
had the same dream, and really quick story. It's totally worth
Yes.
it. But when we moved in, there was brush everywhere. We ended up the Lord just provided this home for us in this wonderful school district in southeastern Pennsylvania that we had no idea that when you cleared out the brush, there was this beautiful stream. And I had this sense to start chopping away all this dead wood when we first moved in here. And then once we did, it was this not only gorgeous stream, but all of these daffodils that were coming up from
Oh,
behind the dead wood. And I remember thinking, how is it that something so beautiful could be so hidden?
oh,
And that's such a metaphor for what I think so many of you are going through right now is like, let God get rid of that dead wood
yeah.
because something beautiful is growing underneath, but you can't see it until that stuff's gone.
Oh, that's so good. That'll preach right there.
Yeah.
That is your Sunday sermon right there. That is good.
It was all God. It was all God calling me into this new place. So it
All
was
right.
awesome.
Last question. Favorite place to vacation? Back when we used to be able to like vacation and things. Do you have
Yeah,
a favorite vacation?
my husband and I went to Costa Rica on our honeymoon. We always said we'd go back with the kids. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's our vacation's going to be in our backyard for a little while, but
Yeah.
someday we'll get back there.
Costa Rica. I love it. Okay. So let me ask you as we finish up here, Laura, one of the questions I'm trying to get better asking everybody because it really is important to me. So, how do you define freedom or what does freedom look like for you?
You know what freedom looks like for me? It's grace.
Mm,
It's grace for us, to ourselves, it's grace to other people.
yeah.
It is giving ourselves permission to make mistakes, learn from them, move on, embrace who we are, love who God made us to be, and using it to invite other people into grace.
That's so good. So good. This is why I love you. Okay, so people are going to be they're going to be DMing me and they're going to be like, "Okay, your friend Laura, where can I find her at? Your friend Laura, how do I find her on social media?" So where do you like to connect with people? How can they reach out to you if anybody is interested in chatting with you about your branding services? In the Babbling Brook in your backyard, like any of the things. How can they
Yeah.
reach you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on all three platforms. For my corporate clients, I'm on LinkedIn. For personal, I'm on Instagram. It's Laura E. Meyer. My company is called Joy Brand Consulting. You can go to joybrandcreative.com. There's a free masterclass there on how to create a movement for your brand from your mission and vision and values. So that's a great place for people to go and just get free content and use it to inspire their next steps.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for
Thank
all
you.
you've done. Just you've been a friend and a great consultant. Thank you for both of
I'm
those things.
so grateful for you. And I love watching you do what you do and just changing the lives of other women. It's so inspirational. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. All right, friends. So go check out Laura Meyer at Joy Brand Creative and go give her some love. And go look her up on all the social medias. Give Laura some love there. Reach out to both of us through Instagram DMs or tag us if you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll be able to see that when you do it. So thank you, friends, for being here. Until next week, stay creative. Bye bye.